Hey everyone, today I've got Raj from How&How, which is an amazing branding and design studio. So I'm excited to talk about processes, get into the whole brand, maybe some brand identity, design processes, systems, workflows, things like that. And those of you that are using Kittl and or other tools professionally for creative work, this is going to be an excellent conversation for you all to maybe take it to the next level, I think. So before we dive into some of the nitty gritty, Raj, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about How&How, the type of work and the branding and maybe some of the logo design stuff that you do, and then we can get into some of these processes.
Great, yeah. Thank you so much, Drew. I'm Rog. Hello. I am a creative slash engineer, maybe like a an engineer trapped in a creative's body, or vice versa.
Mm,
And I love problem solving with creative kind of solutions. I guess a bit about my background. I originally trained as an engineer at university, and my first job was as an engineer in radio. And then I transitioned into production. Just wanted to get involved with making stuff, so moved from servicing studios into operating studios and editing audio, essentially audio branding for radio stations.
mm,
I spent a decade in the BBC, making writing and producing cross promotional trails for those guys when they were promoting their content, their TV content on the radio. Used to make a lot of those spots for their different radio stations, and then after that, my wife and I set up a couple of different businesses. I worked in we ran our own e-commerce for about 7 years. Then we ran a co-working space for a couple of years as well. And it was only after that that we set up the agency, and we kind of rolled all of that experience,
mm.
from my side, but also from Kat, my wife's side. She worked as a journalist and a designer, and then we ran these businesses together. So we had a lot of creative background between us, working in different kind of forms of agencies, and then we'd run businesses as well, sort of been client side, and had to build brands ourselves, and really kind of make them work functionally, and make them kind of have impact on the bottom line. And so it's all that experience that we roll up into the branding agency today, and probably the reason why we went into and niched very quickly into running a branding agency, because there's all sorts of different creative agencies out there. But the branding agency really kind of, we're using creative as a strategic business tool, creating the foundation of creative
Right.
for a company to then build all of their marketing and communications on.
Right, exactly. And so you have a lot of experience to come from all of these different things that you've done into this one now powerful branding entity. I have a question more logistically about how long it took for you to get to this point. So you said you started this with your wife, maybe one or two other people. I don't know, but I mean, looking at the site now, there's quite a bit of a team that you have now. So I'm just wondering, for those viewers watching that have aspirations to grow something quite nice as a branding studio, about how long did it take you to go from just a few to now this kind of full scale staffing branding agency?
Yeah, sure. So we've been running as How&How for about 4 years.
Okay.
So it's been pretty rapid growth. To be fair, it's
Mm,
a lot faster than kind of would usually be the case. But I think because we had a lot of this experience before going into setting up the agency, we'd run businesses before, so that really helped us kind of get the
okay.
business side sorted really easily. I mean, a lot of design agencies and branding agencies are kind of groups of designers who come together to set up an agency, and then they have to kind of figure out all the business side as they kind of grow, and kind of get bigger and bigger clients and things like that. We already had all of that stuff, so actually we've always set up the agency as us as the business owners and overseeing all of the creative, but we've never actually worked as designers for our own agency, which
Mm.
is quite atypical, I think, for the way a lot of creative agencies are usually set up.
Yeah, I would say that most of the time, especially in starting, the person or group of people are doing all the things as you just kind of laid out. They are wearing all the hats between strategy and discovery all the way to here are your final design files. So maybe if we can get into some processes and some workflows, because I think this is you've got to have so much knowledge in this, not having to focus on getting in and learning the technical know-how of all of the updates of whatever digital program, but you can actually diagnose and discern what a client would need visually to help them, make more sales, promote their services, marketing, whatever. So there's some correlation here between branding on an agency scale towards branding to maybe a freelancer, which many people watching might be in that boat that says, well, I've been doing some logo designs, or I was doing merch design or whatever, but maybe they came across like The Future with Chris Do or something on YouTube, and they were like, yeah, branding's where it's at, or discovery where it's at. Why don't you walk us through what happens first? Because what I think a lot of beginner or intermediate or mediocre or somewhere in the medium level of designers that are going to make this transition or just starting out is go straight to visual, like conception, before diagnosing. Um, when a client comes to you, what what are you going to walk them through? Essentially, is what I'm trying to get to the point of. How can we set someone up to have the best process imaginable when they need a branding solution?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of design agencies, branding agencies, designers out there who are, working in branding or aspiring to work in branding. And the most common thing that we see is, as you said, people just jumping straight into visuals,
Right.
straight into, okay, let's like conceive a logo or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the inspiration that they might draw from that might be something within the company, like the functions of a company. Say, like you're branding, I don't know, a butcher's, then you might, pull things from animal forms and like
Right.
steaks and
Okay.
whatever. You're looking for
Right.
like visual cues to kind of use in your brand. That's like the kind of the wrong way to do great branding, because anyone can go in and just make visuals and make them kind of fairly superficial, and make them aesthetically beautiful and look great. But a really great brand is built on a much more strategic foundation. And so when we start with a client, we will always try and cover the three bases of knowledge. First will be the internal makeup of the company. What's their strategy? What's their business strategy? What are they planning to do? Are they trying to reach new
Mm-hmm.
markets? Really understand, the way they work and where they want to get to. Then the second pillar is the consumer, their customers or clients. What do they look like? What do they care about? Who are they? What kind of other businesses are they interacting with? What do they expect from this kind of company? And then also we would like to really understand the marketplace as well. Who else exists in this market? What are they looking like? What are they saying? How are they presenting themselves as a brand? And then the primary role of a brand should be to create something completely unique. So something which is completely different from all of those other kind of people in the market, and needs to be rooted in some kind of truth of what the company can do that no one else can do, your USP or your core kind of differentiator. And and then it also needs to be memorable. And so in order to create unique and memorable brands, we need to create a unique story, a unique narrative for the brand, first of all. And it's that narrative that then forms the foundation of any creative that happens later. So we
Mm.
create a narrative, and supporting that narrative will be a kind of character as well. If the narrative is about making things clear, then we could say, okay, well, maybe the character of this company is a bit like the persona of a scientist or something, making things like calculating things and making them clear that way. Or they could be, I don't know, another kind of persona that might be kind of helping, like, I don't know, a caring kind of persona or something like that, which can help you shepherd you through some kind of difficulty. Um, so the narrative and the character, once we have that nailed, then any creative after that, whether it's written or if it's visual, can follow that narrative. And if we follow that narrative with everything we do, we create memorability because we're telling the same story in multiple ways, visually and verbally. And the more times we tell that story, the more it sticks and the more people like understand it and remember it. And also the more unique that story, then people are like, oh, that's like something I haven't seen before. And it wakes people up from the mundanity of like everything else that they see. So those are the things that we look to do. We look to design a brand in words first. We don't do any visuals for probably about a month at least for pretty much all of our client work that we do. And only once you have that strategic narrative nailed and the supporting strategic elements, so your positioning statement, your character or persona setting, then you can say, okay, let's brief the designers. This is what we need to. This is the story we need to be telling. This is the concepts that we want to be, using. Let's create the visuals around that. So when we then move to the next stage, we can create the visual execution, and usually we'll present options at that stage. We might present, say, 2 different options or 3 different options, which are all different ways of expressing that narrative. For example, if we use the example of clarity, if we're saying, okay, this brand is about bringing clarity to your kind of whatever problem you've got, visually we could use a blur that becomes, comes into focus, or we could use something which is pixelated, which kind of then comes into view, or something which is obscures something and you're like revealing, or so there's lots of different visual ways you could execute the same concept. So there we do like to create multiple routes for clients to choose from, because then you do get a bit of kind of preference of a CEO who, like we've had it loads of times, a CEO is just, not prepared to have a pink brand or something like that. And so once we create the visuals, then they'll choose one of those routes, and then we can go through the finalization stage and, really kind of systematize the brand and build out any assets that are needed, like a website or, the brand guidelines or any kind of presentation decks or whatever you might need. So,
that's what you would consider as like the deliverables, right? The website, stationery, whatever those are. I feel like that might be the point of contention, is where a lot of freelancers might just jump to, right? The branding is everything, is what they kind of have in their mind. And I think there's a lot to unpack in the first series of steps that you mentioned, which is about getting down to what you're trying to say, which is the narrative. And I really like the idea of branding as narrative. I think it aligns quite nicely with Marty Neumeier's brand gap ideas of a brand being a gut feeling and not about a visual, not attached to a mark, but it's actually the accumulation of people, the following, the community. They are the brand essentially, or yeah, that's for lack of a better way to explain it. Their emotions, thoughts, and feelings and perceptions of what they see is what the brand is. And I really like tying it closely together with what you've mentioned, which is narrative. So we're going to build this narrative. I think that's a super strong place to start. And we've come a long way from what branding was a very long time ago, which was furnishing a brand into the side of a cattle, right? And that's my cattle, right? That's my brand that's on that thing, right? Which really just meant word mark or logo mark or whatever. So I think if we can unpack these first series of steps a little bit more, it'll set up the upcoming freelancer or the upcoming marketer or agency that wants to provide these things for clients or people in a much more effective way. So there's tons of YouTube videos on kind of how to lead discovery sessions. And I'm sure for you and for bigger brands and or companies, these take a lot more time. Like you mentioned, something like a month, and the meetings could be 1 hour, 2 hours, 3-day sessions. What are you hoping to achieve in these series of meetings? Like, I guess, for example, would one meeting consist of something like, okay, we're going to create this word map, and this is like our central focus word, and here are all of the words that go around it, and we are going to like kind of itemize these words and pick the ones that most most represent you, your values. I mean, I know I'm already kind of jumping to what the actual meeting looks like, but yeah, what are, I guess, what are the individual accomplishments in the first series of steps, the discovery,
Mm.
that will help someone, like, before they even get to, like, okay, we're not conceptualizing what a butcher knife or a cattle looks like for your brand. We just want to get down to, like, what is the essence of you and what you
Yeah,
believe as a company. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully you know
yeah,
what
yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and it's kind of tricky actually because
Mm,
basically in its most basic form is a series of conversations, right? And
okay.
the you can have a really good branding discovery session by taking the CEO of a company to the pub and just chatting to them
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah. Right. Right.
really
Right.
understanding. So it can be as simple as that as a conversation. So we'll have workshops, but
Mm, mm,
when we do a workshop, it's always conceived to be relevant and appropriate for that scenario. Sometimes our workshops are just a series of questions. They're just
okay.
saying,
Okay.
okay, we'd like more clarification around this. Like, we've seen that you guys do this. Like, why do you do that? Or we've seen that your competitors are doing that. Like, why aren't we doing that? Or how are
Mm,
you
mm,
different to them? Or so all of the gaps that we have, we basically want to fill in those conversations. And so sometimes, yeah, our workshops will just be a series of questions, which are all designed to uncover the stuff that we think we're going to need and need to know about a brand. Sometimes we'll do, if there's a lot of stakeholders, we might do something which is more interactive, where because we can't hear individually from everyone, very in a very kind of efficient way, we might have to do something where there's an interactive Miro board where we'll
okay.
kind of we'll get some sliding scales and say, like, on a scale of like premium to economy, where do you guys sit, and things like that. So but the most kind of valuable is if you can just get the decision makers in a room or a chat and just really probe and really understand. And what you're looking for is to understand every inch of their business and ask the difficult questions, which they might not have asked themselves as well. So sometimes, we like to be a little bit confrontational in those
Mm,
chats,
mm,
and
good.
just point out things which we think are wrong, and just say, what's going on here, or a perception of a company that, like, if we might have done some research and found that they're getting tons of bad reviews somewhere or something, we were like, well, what's
Mm,
going on here? What's the
right.
what's the issue here? So it's about uncovering truth. We just want the truth about the business, how it operates, what the problems are, what the benefit, what the like strengths are. So however you can get that is what you need to do. But yeah, the most effective is just sitting down and really just hearing directly from the horse's mouth, what they're doing now and what they're hoping to achieve in the future. Um, so yeah, it's a woolly answer, but the answer is
Mm,
we design those conversations every time in a new way. It's
wow.
never kind of one size fits all. There's things that we know that we need to know. So those pillars that I talked about, but it might be one client. It's very obvious what their marketplace is because it's a public
Right.
brand, and
Yeah.
there's like tons of visibility into the other players. It might be something which is a B2B, which we know nothing about. So we really need to understand how that
Right.
market works, and they're the expert in the market. So we need to kind of understand that. So yeah, it's really, really sort of circumstantial, what you would actually do to be able to fill in all the gaps that you need.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that should be the model that a freelancer or an individual takes, just based on the attribution of value to a company. I mean, you're gonna charge you're gonna charge and work on Nike, for a very different set of time and money than you would for a mom and pop shop down the road, right? Now, I want to come back to this idea of managing the decision makers in a second, because I think that people really struggle with this, and they, a lot of back and forth happens via email, myself included. I run into this often, so I want to get your thoughts on that. But do you ever? I've started doing this just as I have a very small branding agency on the side, or I call it a branding agency, but I do a lot of hand lettered vintage design is basically the staple. Like, I'm not going to do Yeah, like whatever the logo is will be hand drawn and vectorized, and it will take 3 to 4 months to even draw. But and you tell me what you think about this. But I start with the question, uh, why do you need a logo? Your logo looks fine. Or like, why do you think you need a new brand? Like your brand looks fine. Do you ever find yourself doing the research in the beginning? My point in asking this question is a lot stronger and more powerful than what it sounds like, kind of being off-putting. Like, I don't want your work, because obviously what you're saying is like, I want you to explain to me why you need the work, and then I'll explain to you
Hmm.
why I'm the person that can do the work. But
Yeah.
it sounds similar to what you're saying, and like, we could go to the pub and I could have the CEO explain to me all the problems that they have, but I could also just as easily look at the website and say, I don't know, the branding looks pretty good to the eye.
Hmm.
So why do
Yeah.
you think you need it? This is going to cost a lot of money. I don't know if that makes sense, but you tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean that does happen. Sometimes we'll have companies, who have already had some branding work done, and they might be looking a certain way. Usually, it's because there's some kind of strategic reason. If we're like wondering why things look, that they're coming to us if things already look quite good. Um,
Hmm.
the truth is that it's quite rare. Like most of the time, people come to us because that there's an issue with the brand of some kind, and normally that's visual.
Okay.
But when it's not visual, then often it might be that they're changing their positioning in some way. They need a shift of perception. They've been perceived in a particular way, and so that perception needs to shift to something else. Like, I don't know, a company which is a startup which is servicing enterprise clients, and they look kind of disruptive, but now they need to grow up and become a bit more serious.
Hmm.
Or vice versa, that happens the other way around when startups, don't invest very much into their brand, and they end up with something which is kind of like, okay, it looks okay aesthetically, but it's not very unique. That's one of the biggest problems that we have people coming to us with. They have a brand, it looks okay, but it looks the same as everyone else's brand. And so then it's a differentiation piece of saying, okay, well, we need to get something which is much more unique and different to all of the competitors, because they're kind of blending in too much. So I kind of like to ask a lot of questions around, what is like, if we had a successful project with you guys, in 2 years' time, what does that look like? What does success
Hmm.
look like for you? That's a
Yeah.
really great question. It's really open and broad, and it means you can understand from their perspective what value they're looking for. What do they want to achieve? Where do they want to get to? And that really helps kind of set the scene of any, like, beginning of any conversation, to really understand like what they're aspiring to do. It's a question I ask in almost every sales conversation as well, because you
Okay.
want to know. Sometimes people will say, "Well, our website doesn't work very well," and they're not actually
Right.
worried too much about visuals, but it's actually the website's not converting
Yeah.
very well. Or they might say, our logo is really good, but the rest of the brand doesn't work very well, and we needs to be more coherent or whatever. And so it might be from that conversation you can understand what value you can bring and what value they're seeing in the relationship, and then you can tailor all of your kind of your work to be focused on that particular problem that they're seeing.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of open questions are really valuable, um, and probing questions about what's good and what's bad, and getting people to be honest. That's always the kind of challenge. You want people to talk badly of their own company in some way.
Yeah. Um, Decision makers. So thinking about this can be daunting, I think, and complicated for those that are maybe on their own, or starting up, or smaller agencies, not quite as larger scale, like yours, or even located centrally in something like London or New York or LA. So I kind of have a method for trying my best to get, and this is just obviously small individualized projects, but I try my best to get to who the decision maker is going to be just in the first call, to even see if this is something that I want to have time for, and or if it's worth their time. What I find or hear most often is someone that's reaching out and are communicating for as the client that is not the immediate or final decision maker. And that might be someone who is a creative director or a communications director or a marketer or something that has been provided the problem or task of searching for a solution to the branding issue, right? CEO says, I don't know, our visuals kind of suck, and no one's like, our click through rate is quite bad, and our UI is not very good, and we have no idea what we're saying. Such and such and such. Can you find a solution to this that will be, helpful and good, and an agency that knows what they're doing? But the problem with that is you could go down the line with this said person. They could feel really good about it. Then they show it to the CEO and they're like, well, I had something different in mind. So, how do you manage decision makers? How quickly do you try to get them in the room? And where are they in along the process?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a challenge. And again, it really, really depends on the organization that you're speaking with,
True.
not just how big they are, but how they're organized, um, and how important the particular person you're kind of speaking to is. So when we're working with bigger companies, then usually it's the CMO who might be the decision maker, and they will be the one who will deal with the
Okay.
CEO relationship.
Mm.
Um, but sometimes the CEO is really passionate about design and really wants to get involved, and is really heavily involved in the process. Um, and sometimes it might be say a designer or the only designer, like a product designer who
Yeah.
is within the company and tasked as like, and they're like the creative person, and so
Right.
they're the one who has got like the job to kind of find someone. The key is to just understand what the client kind of map looks like. And as soon as you get
Right.
on that
Okay.
early call with someone, one of the key questions you've got to ask them is, what does your team look like on your side? What is the process that you're looking to run to choose a design
Mm.
agency? And so then with that, you can understand where they're at in the journey. If it's just really early on and they haven't even thought about what process they're going to use to choose, um, or they're just, it's just really early kind of discovery that they're kind of been tasked with, or sometimes people will contact us and they'll invite us straight to an RFP, which is a request for a pitch, and
Okay.
or request for proposal rather. And then cool. Well, they're putting us in a list of however many. It's always really important to know how many other agencies are involved and how many other agencies they're speaking with as well, because sometimes they'll be
Okay.
like, "Oh yeah, I'm speaking with 20 agencies," and you're like, "Okay, they're not obviously that serious about us as an
Yeah.
agency if they're just putting us in a massive pool, or if it's only a few, like if it's kind of three or four, then you're in with a good chance, and they've chosen you as
Mm.
and done some due diligence before even reaching out to you." To kind of create a short list based on just what they've seen
Yeah.
on the website. So
Right. Right.
you're trying
Right.
to understand the person, where they sit in the organization, how much authority they have, but
Yes.
also
Yeah.
how kind of experienced they are at running a process like this, and how whether they would understand what a usual process would look like, or you need to educate them
Mm.
and help them as well. But whatever
Good.
you
Yeah.
can do, I always take the stance of whoever I'm speaking to, I'm just going to help them as much as I can. And if
Mm.
they're really into what we do, they become an advocate, and they can become an advocate within the organization. So sometimes you get yourself in a situation where you actually have this person who's on the inside who can tell you loads of stuff about what the CEO likes, what the CMO likes, if they're like bought in, and you're kind of forming a bit of a team with them to say, cool, let's see if we can win this thing together, and you kind of form the pitching team with them. That's actually very powerful when you can do that, because you
Right.
have like an inside person who can give you a lot of tips and a lot of kind of help along the way, and it's always like having a mole. You can kind of like ask them, if the conversations have happened, and what everyone's thinking, and so the answer is every time it's completely different, but you want to try and get
Yeah.
as clear
Okay.
a picture of what it looks like in their world, and the relationships they have to manage internally, and who the decision makers are, we try to speak to decision makers as early as possible.
Right.
We try and
Right.
say, okay, cool, on the next team, how about our wider team meets your wider team, and then we can use that as a chemistry chat. So we'll just suggest that and always be pushing to kind of speak to decision makers as early as possible. It's very, very rare that we would go into a pitch and have not spoken to the decision makers, because those
Mm.
conversations are really important to learn what, like I said before, what the decision makers are valuing, what they're expecting to buy from you. We don't even put together proposals until the kind of, or the financial
Yes.
proposal, till right at the end of the process, because we're trying to win
Okay.
them over on the work that we can do, the value that we can bring,
Mhm.
case studies that might represent problems that they've had. We'll
Mhm.
construct something which is really tailored towards what they're valuing, and then if they buy it all, then the financials are the bit that you can just deal with at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always trying to get as much information and gradually winning over the prospect and their team as well, and then the kind of bit right at the end with the financials should be like the kind of formality, just to kind of close the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So pitches and budget, money are maybe the last two things I want to talk about, because you mentioned it just a second ago. If an agency or someone is going to request, the proposal or the build or the plan or whatever, before even kind of getting into anything, slightly a red flag, I think. And it's also not worth your time. So that's a lot of time and effort and money that you've wasted building a proposal. And I think that this is a big um, issue for freelancers, basically pitching everything all the time, all day long, and just taking just taking the bid, and or saying like, all right, cool, that I'm going to put together this immaculate proposal. And I know there's templates and things for this that you can have so that you can easily fill, and that's fine. How do you manage uh, the severity or the seriousness of a client, and when you are going to put together a proposal, um, or a pitch deck or something like that? Because I'm trying to advocate for the individual or the smaller marketing agency or the large branding agency, in saying that it's just not worth your time or your value putting something like that together without having some sort of unofficial but kind of verbal communicative agreement, right? Of kind of a verbal vibes contract that's been made, that's like, I'm feeling pretty good, we're going to move forward with this. So maybe you can interpret my question better, but I think maybe you know what I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean, for us and for, I guess, anyone who's pitching for work and just trying to win work, um, you're almost always in a pool of people that someone's trying to decide, and
Okay.
so that's the most common scenario. But what you can do with those inbound leads is try and create some kind of scoring system. So it might be that your typical client, you have a really good idea of the size of the company, the problems that they might have, how appropriate you are for that particular
Yes.
client.
Yeah.
So you have a scoring system of something like, okay, well, we do loads of B2B work, but sometimes we get B2C kind of clients coming to us. And we could say, okay, well, if it's a B2B, we have a higher likelihood of winning because our portfolio has got more B2B in it. So we can
Right.
put a
Okay.
bit of a heavier weighting on that. If it's a B2C, we'd love to do it, but maybe we don't have as many kind of case studies to show that like we could win that work. Um, and So we use a combination of a few things. There's financials, which plays a big role. If it's a huge contract, we might put more effort into it. The industry that they're in, the appetite for the kind of work that we do. So, if they've already expressed that they want to do something disruptive and unique and different, that also, because that's what we provide, that gives a higher score. Also, we have a bit of an environmental kind of bias as well. So if there's an
Okay.
environmental project, then often we will push that higher, because we have commitment to our B Corp status for the amount of sustainability-based projects that we do each year. So there's a number of different factors that we use to say, okay, this gives it a slightly heavier weighting. And then the level of pitch then gets determined by that. So if it's something which has a lower weighting, we might say, okay, well, we're not going to create a really and spend a lot of time on a big pitch. We might just say, okay, cool, this is a project we'd love to help you with. Here's what a project might look like, the kind of practicals of it. If you'd like to move ahead, then let's go for it. But for something which is, say, a huge contract, and we know that there's other kind of competing agencies trying to win the work, then we might say, okay, we really want to win this. We're going to invest, a week of time and dedicate a couple of team members to creating a pitch, which is really going to show that we're really serious about it. I'm not an advocate of creative pitching, so actually showing visuals within a creative pitch.
Okay.
It's very, very rare that we do that, and I can explain an instance when we have done that,
Sure.
which is a decision that we made for a particular reason. But most of the time, we will try and pitch ideas. We'll say to kind of give a response to the brief, which is like, okay, from the conversations we've had, we see that you have this challenge. And then we say, well, this is how we propose to tackle that challenge. And this other challenge, this is how we propose. So it's mostly words based and mostly strategic kind of thinking to show that we can think around the problem, we understand them, we get them, we get the problems that they're facing, and we have solutions to be able to solve those things. So that's the way that we would do a kind of answer to a brief. And then occasionally we would go into creative, but that's so. For example, we're doing one at the moment for a B2C brand that we really, really want to win.
Okay.
And we do have a bit less B2C stuff in our portfolio.
Sure.
And this particular job is it's the concept for some confectionery, and everything about this thing is, if we get a really cool concept, they will buy that and they will take us forward. So we knew that we could talk strategically, but it wouldn't be as relevant for this brief. It would be they're looking for something really disruptive, a real new idea, and so we've said, okay, well, we've got tons of ideas. Here's 4 of our best ones that we've had so far, and and some idea of how that might manifest itself in very light touch, creative, but mostly just so we can get the concept across. So that's an instance where we've chosen to do something slightly different. And again, we tailor the response completely bespoke to each lead that comes in, because someone who's valuing a really, really efficient process and really wants to see detail, if we've understood that the person we're trying to convince is a detail person, then we will show them the project detail and we'll say, here's the timeline, here's all the feedback stages, here's what it's going to look like from a practical perspective.
Right.
But if the person we're pitching to we know is a bit of a creative and a dreamer, then we might try and wow them with emotions and storytelling, and we'll create a pitch which is bespoke for that particular person. So again, we're trying to understand who we're speaking to so we can tailor our response so that it fits with what they would expect. And so there's a few things to kind of consider when you're pitching, but there's also just the extreme end of this, which is what we call the power of no, which is sometimes something's just not worth it. And we just say, it's not the kind of work we do. It's really outside of very unlikely we might win it. And if we might win it, actually, it might be something that people don't want to work on, because that, as an agency, that's not the kind of work that we do. So often if something comes in, we'll just say, no, that's not what we do. And it means you can concentrate all your efforts on the stuff that you are good at and the stuff that you know that you will execute really well. And that means that you can start to become really specialist and really good at your specialism. So the power of no is a powerful force. And then also one thing that I should mention is, before we go into pitch at all and we decide how to weight something, is we really need to understand the value or the potential value of a piece of work. And this is something that people find really difficult to kind of talk about, talking about money, talking about, how much you're going to charge. It's a difficult thing to navigate. And so we have a stage in our early process called the value conversation, and it could be baked into another conversation. It could be a specific conversation where we're all about just trying to understand how much value is being attributed to the piece of work, and it could be as straightforward as what budget has been allocated for this, and there
Right.
might be a
Good.
budget, and they can
Yeah.
just give you that budget, and you're like, okay, well, either that's too low for us, or yeah, we could make a project work with it, and that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's all we need to talk about now because we've got a ballpark. If people are being cagey about telling you how much they want to spend, then we have a few different techniques. Like if someone just doesn't want to say, then we could say, well, to give you an idea, we do projects from
Good. Good.
half a
Yeah.
million down to 50K.
Good.
It's a
Yeah.
really broad,
Yeah.
it's a really, really broad spectrum. And there's a number of decisions we can make together which will affect the size of the budget. And so what will really help is if we can narrow down a range that you want us to work within so
Mm-hmm.
that then we can make sure that we're presenting stuff which is not going to be way out of your budget. And then if you get people talking about a range, it's a bit more happy. They can say, oh, well, oh yeah, we're definitely down the lower end of that. So then it might be, and then you can say, okay, well, maybe we'll put some together some options for like 50 to 100K, say. And then you can very crucially be quiet. As once you say something like that,
Yes.
you have to
Yes.
be quiet,
Yes. Good.
be comfortable with the silence,
Yes.
and let the other person fill the uncomfortable silence with a response. Because the natural thing to do is you spit out a number and say, we could do 50K to 100K, or maybe a bit less than that, and then, like if you jump
Right.
in and
Right.
try
Right.
and
Right. Yeah.
fill, you kind of trying to fill that awkward silence, but actually it's as awkward for the person who you're talking to, and you want them to fill in that silence. So you put in
Mm.
that question, what's your budget, and then you just leave it there.
Yeah.
and then they just have to answer in some way, and they might say, oh well, I'm not comfortable, I don't think we have one, or whatever. And then you can say, okay, well, why don't we talk about budget range?
Mm.
um,
Mm.
so you can really start to just get a feel for it. And you want to get a feel for where their ballparks are to make sure it's going to be something that's viable for you to operate in. And then you can also tailor your response accordingly. Because if they've got a 100K budget, then you might treat it very differently to if someone's got a 10K budget.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. And there's a psychological reason to saying the higher number first, actually.
Yeah,
Right. You
exactly.
have this,
Always.
it sounds like I'm listening to Christo himself here. So there's this this high psychological trigger that's like, oh shoot, $1 million or $500,000 or 750K. Holy crap, that is nowhere close to where I am. But then you say, but I've also done work for 50K and I don't go lower than 50K. And then you just sit there and you wait, right? And then what that does is it releases, extreme kind of panic mode. And then when you say that lower number, you reverse the range. Then they say, okay,
Yeah.
that's not as bad as what I thought was about to happen.
It's a psychological bias we have called price anchoring. So
Yes.
yeah, you the first number that you put in is the anchor number, which
Mm,
someone would be like, okay, that's the sort of base value of what you provide.
hmm
And so yeah, if you say that higher number first, that's exactly like I just said it in exactly the way that I would say to a client.
Exactly. Right.
Always like 500K first, or 100K, or whatever is like the most that you would ever charge for something. Um, and yeah, that means they get anchored to that number, and anything lower than that feels like it's cheaper.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, cool, I'm getting like
I'm
that
getting a
value
deal.
that they might give to someone else. So I'm being able to actually access that for a much lower number. We do it also when we present pricing options. It's very rare that we would present one price to a client. We would always present three top line options, which sit within their budget. A kind of deluxe top option first,
Packaging.
um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and then a middle option, and then a third option. And the third option always doesn't really have everything that the client might need,
Obviously.
but the deluxe option has everything that they ever
Everything.
dreamed
Yeah.
of. And so then you always end up somewhere in between some options, because they can be like, oh, my budget's like option two, but I really want this extra thing that you have in option one,
Well, of
like an
course.
animation package or something.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
then you can slightly push up the budget and really like sell some extra value to them as well.
Yeah. And in no way do I hope what people aren't hearing, and I don't think they are because you haven't said it this way, but that is not to be disingenuous or sneaky in any way, right? Having this, I think this is perfectly fine because people might be thinking, oh, well, why would you try to trick the client into having the higher one? Well, it's because they're going to get more stuff. So there's no like, it's not like you're trying to be sneaky. If they pick the middle one, great. You guys still get paid. It's less work you have to do. And everybody
Yeah.
goes home happy. And that's fine. Now, the reason that I wanted to have this kind of conversation about pricing and budget is because I think freelancers or people who have their own kind of smaller or individual branding agencies are awful at this. And I think they're afraid and they're scared and they kind of just take any and all stuff. And perhaps it's because they've not been educated in this anchoring model or they just don't have the experience. But I think a lot of it is like, I need this thing. And what that does is not allow them to work on the more niche and specific stuff that will bring them more money so that they don't need to take everything. So, with that in mind, what, I guess, what kind of like beginning inspiring suggestions do you have for people that are trying to get better at pricing? I definitely struggle with this when I started out. Now I have it down to like, I only take very individualized specific branding projects that will take always this amount of time and it will always start at this amount of money because it's going to be hand drawn. That's very niche and specific. But it took me a long time to get there. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this one I could probably do in 2 days. That's 500. This one maybe 300. And it's just, it's wacky. It's
Yeah.
wackadoodle. So what kind of
Yeah.
suggestions can you give to people that struggle with price?
So I would always start with the value that you're going to sell something for.
Mm,
And that's the point of having that value conversation with a client, is to understand where their budget kind of sensitivity is, and how much they're willing to spend.
yeah,
And if you start with that figure, then you can then try and fit your project within that. And um, sometimes that might give you a lower day rate. Sometimes it might give you a higher day rate. But if you sell on value, it means that your day rate can gradually increase because you're selling the value that someone wants to kind of spend. And as you get more and more experienced, it's right that you should be charging more and more for
exactly.
your for your
Exactly.
skills.
Yes. Yes.
People who do well in the creative industries in general versus people who make outstanding profit and gains, is the difference between people who sell on value and people who sell on cost. And
Mm-hmm.
if I sell on cost, I am basically saying, okay, you need a project that's going to take me 10 days. So I'm going to charge you a day rate on those 10 days, and that's how much it's going to cost. Or if I'm going to pull in anyone else to help me with this project, I'm going to take their cost and I'm going to add like 20% or 30%.
Right.
It's a
Right. Right.
fixed cost that you're creating there. And that means you're limiting your profit to whatever you're putting on top of, what it is you're selling. Whereas if you start from the other side, you start from the client side, you say, okay, how much are they willing to spend? Then you can say, build a project within that, and you can say, cool, I can build a project here which is going to take me 10 days, and the client's willing to spend 10K on that. So that means like they're valuing my services a lot higher than I was valuing it myself, and
Sure.
that's great. That's great. I mean, like you should capitalize on that because
Yeah.
they're seeing that value, and they want to pay that. So that's how much you should charge. So the difference is, you need to look from the client side on how much they're willing to spend, and then build your project underneath that kind of that price. And it means, as a result, we don't, as an agency, we don't have a fixed day rate that we charge
Sure.
clients,
Sure.
unless we go into a retainer model where we sort of have to, because we have to provide a certain level of service every month. And they might get, I don't know, 20
Yeah.
hours a month or something like that. And then you sort of
Well,
have
yeah.
to fix that. But if you're doing project work, every project that comes in is a new opportunity for you to
Mm,
push up your day rate a little bit. And the more experienced you become, the more the kind of richer your portfolio is, then you should be charging that a little bit more. I kind of use
right.
the analogy of like restaurants.
Okay.
In a restaurant, if you have a chef who becomes better and better, it's normal that the price of the dishes will go up and up, and they
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
Michelin star, and
yeah.
suddenly they double the prices, and people are coming and they're willing to pay because there's the evidence that like the food is amazing. With the creative industries in general, it's very, very similar. We're always looking to say, okay, well, how can we make sure that we're getting the value that people are kind of attributing to our services?
Right. Yeah. And it's really powerful too, because the kind of fixed cost day rate perspective also can punish you for being like really fast, for example. Like as you grow in your
Yeah.
skills and you become better and you go, "Oh crap, this only took me like 3 days. I'm actually pretty good." So now I've now I've
Yeah.
pigeonholed myself to this
You should
fixed
be
thing.
charging, when actually you should be charging more, and it's taking
More,
you less
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and
there's
that's how that works. Yeah, and
there's
I
a
think
classic.
that yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say there's a classic story about Paula Scher,
Oh,
who is, obviously, needs no introduction. And she did the logo for Citibank
yeah, in like
in
5
the
minutes or something.
yeah, in the meeting with the client, she just kind of sketched it on a piece of paper, and then it was one of the most valuable,
Sure.
branding jobs that was ever charged at the time when they actually did the final work. But the logo itself was pretty much the sketch that she did in the client meeting, and when she got asked about it, she just said, "Well, this is like 30 years of experience that you're
Yeah,
buying here.
yeah,
That enables me to be able to do that. So
yeah,
like that's what makes me more valuable.
yeah, you're buying the amount of education and or research that's done, because not necessarily everybody goes to get, classically trained in the arts or design or whatever. The amount of equipment and training that you've have and done and what you've paid for and the programs and all these skills and things. And that's already just what would be considered base or cost fixed pricing. Everything is like you're saying. I think value is always stronger. And not only per project, I really like the idea of how you've said each one is a new opportunity. It's a new thing. It doesn't, it's not independent, or it's not dependent on the previous things what we've done. We have to handle it a little bit differently. And then as you grow, then you get to increase your, whatever you want to call it, day rate, fixed
And
rate, value rate. Yeah.
it kind of works the other way around as well. Like if there's a project that we really, really want to get, and it's a small company, but
Mm.
there's a really cool idea there, and we
Yeah. Yeah.
know that if it was in our portfolio, it would be really, really great. It means that we can go the opposite and
The
say, okay,
opposite.
well,
Okay.
we'd be
Yeah.
we'll be willing to take a lower rate on this because there's other value that we can get as an agency in the marketing that it'll bring for us, or the new opportunities that will then come as a result of us having that particular project in our portfolio. So we'll do that all the time. If there's a really interesting startup that comes along and everyone's like really excited about it, it's like, okay, cool. We just need to find a way of doing this project, no matter what, really. And so it means that also we can be a bit picky and choosy about the kinds of work that we do, and be willing to flex our kind of rates accordingly, because there's not just monetary value that you get from a
Sure.
project. There's
Sure.
there's actually just working with someone who's really nice, or
Right.
the team being really happy, or it being a purpose-driven company which is going to
Mm.
like help reduce climate change, or there's tons of additional value that you can see in a project, other than money. For us also, if it's a great marketing opportunity, like if we can see and that there's willingness of a CEO or a founder to be really daring in an
Mm.
industry which is where they're trying to disrupt something which is really out of the ordinary,
Hmm. Hmm.
we know that when we launch that as a case study, people are going to find it really interesting, and it's going to get us a ton of
Yeah.
marketing as a
Yeah.
result of doing the project. So we're always considering that as well. Projects for our own kind of agency marketing is, sometimes we'll do stuff which is pro bono, or very low value, because there's that extra value that we get as an agency for doing the project.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Raj, this has been amazing. There's so much more we could go into, I think, because we haven't even talked about creative or visual. We haven't even talked about presenting. We haven't even talked about case studies, as you've mentioned a couple of times, writing that. What the heck even goes into that? But I think this has been a really great primer. I think maybe even setting us up for a V2 if you're willing at some point. That'd be awesome. Now, I want to give you the floor for a few minutes to talk about where people can either find or learn more from you. I feel like I can already sense comments or questions that are like, does Raj like train anywhere? Does he have a course or something? I don't know. So like, where can they either find out more about you, or just what to follow along with, or what's upcoming for you, or where to see examples of work? Of course, I've got the website link down below. I mean, it's phenomenal. If you need good ideas for an exemplar of what you should look like, I mean, your site is amazing. So if you want to just give any and all, you have the floor to kind of talk about anything that you feel you need people to know. And yeah, hopefully we can do a V2 to this sometime.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, yeah, so like you said, the website down below has a load of our previous work and everything. We're pretty active on LinkedIn as well.
Okay,
Our
good.
company's channel in particular, you'll get all of our updates there. And, if anyone wants to reach out, then LinkedIn is probably the best place to do that. So just hit me up a request and send me a message, and I'll always come back to you. And also on Insta as well. Obviously, we have our company channel there. Maybe we can
Okay, good.
pop the handle down there, and that's where you'll see all of our really visual stuff that gets put out there all the
Nice.
time. So that's where you can see kind of the inspiration stuff that gets through, and some stuff that doesn't get put up onto the website and made into full case studies as well. So yeah, LinkedIn, Insta, and our website is where you can find most information about us.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I'll collect all that from you and make sure that that's linked down in the description for everyone. Now, if you've been watching and you've had a particular question, comment, issue, please comment it down below so that we can read that. Maybe set us up for another conversation and/or just more video content, things like that we can talk about. I definitely want to talk much more about branding, getting projects, clients, things like that on the channel as we go throughout the rest of this year. So please, if you have concerns, questions, you're just starting your career, let us know down in the comments. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to Kittl as well so you don't miss amazing interviews just like this. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.